but I just want to set up a kind of a pace and a thinking about some of the conversations that we said today, about who's not in the room. And that needs to be said again, really. It's the responsibility of who doesn't get to be in this room. It's not just about whether they can physically be here, it's about social capital. How do you know such things even exist if you're not from a social circle, or a friendship circle, or a support circle, or a social economic reality that even says autism is a thing, or dyslexia is a thing, or dyspraxia, and so on and so on. If you're from a culture where it is a conversation of shame, how will you start that conversation? If you are from a culture or an identity where you have to do more in the workplace to get further in the workplace, then you learn to share less in the workplace. And you learn you're hardwired to do that. It's a question of survival. And even if folks are talking about the differences you can relate to, unless they look like you won't necessarily participate. So we've got to figure out about where do we go to those places? Where do we act as models for those places? Myself, I felt as a child I went from sick to bad. You know, I was always just not well with my learning and not good at it. And then I decided, as many young folks, that I would resist that. And so I then became bad. But from sick to bad, there wasn't a place of welcome. And it won't be for millions and millions of other people around the world. I'm not the only story or a tragedy story. I think I'm fantastic, actually. but it took me time. It took me time to learn to make eye contact with people. I didn't do it till I was in my 20s. Yeah, I'm actually quite comfortable talking here, but I couldn't have imagined a younger me would have just come up with a million different reasons why this is not going to happen. And I'd even commit to it and still not turn up. And so these are things that happen because there's so much at stake when people give the emotional labor to tell you their stories. And when they're giving that emotional labor, okay, they're doing it because they're fighting not just for themselves, but again, they're fighting for the folks who can't be in this room. And that's important to take stock of. So why is it everyone's business? Well, there's some really good numbers. Let's start with some good things, right? Look, we know, I'm just on the next slide, I don't know if I can't see it, so I'm just going to do a psychic link to hope that's okay. But it's higher revenue. We understand that inclusive businesses work better. We know that. There's some good science on that. I'm not going to spend too much telling you to folks who are already tied to that. But do think for a second that the economy is made up of small, medium enterprises. It's not the corporates that get to be in this room as well. 92% of this economy is made up of small, medium enterprises who care about the same things that the corporates care about. They care about the things we care about. And they have people in their families marginalised. How will they make that leap? That's part of what we've got to take on here. That's why it's everyone's business. On my next slide, what you should see is just an understanding look. And we work as an organisation closely with crisis. And it's heartbreaking, really, to think about the impact of neurodiversity when it's not supported. The impact it leads to homelessness and people not protecting their welfare, their shelter, their employment choices, and their relationships. And I'm really saying outright, these are folks who don't have a diagnosis. There's a lot of folks that don't want one, and a lot of folks that won't see a relief in getting one. What they do need is an understanding, and that's part of it. Part of that understanding is making social economic changes in your life, because that's how we start to heal and rebuild, when we can make those choices and change our quality of life. So a lot of people, as Amanda's touched on it, really half of people entering prison populations. So I'm just going to go through this fast, but hopefully not too fast. Neurodiversity, it intersects with other experiences. Of course, you can be have cerebral palsy, and why have we got gender here, and we've got gender pay gap here, and we've got disability over here, and we've got neurodiversity here? Why, and Matt, Dan did touch on it. It is intersectional, of course it is. And if it's not intersectional in our understanding, then we're not relevant in our understanding. Yeah, and it has to take that journey. So there are barriers to it, but the biggest thing is, look, we are losing stuff. On my next slide is really just touching on the realities. And these are heartfelt realities, really, but it is, I've touched on it earlier, it touches on so much of our lives, about literacy, about faith and religion and gender isolation. It's all tied to that. That cultural learning isolation is something that happens to so many people, but the advocacy of it and those who get to talk about it may at the moment coming from a certain class background. And that is going to take some challenge of how we change that and how we welcome that challenge. On my next slide is just, I'm coming towards this really quickly, is really, this is a poll that we did with frontline anti-homeless organisations, each one representing a different organisation. But the issues around neurodiversity and those who, it's really a lack of equal opportunities. It's really there. And to think, look, the responsibilities are here. Whatever we do in business affects civil society. And there is no change in a business unless civil society is changing with it. They are deeply linked. And we've got to make that, I guess, our responsibility. And I think some of the corporate giants with really good muscle and thinking about environment, social governance goals, as well as just what D&I does. It's there. It's really there for the taking. So I guess I'm touching on my next slide, and I'm coming towards the end of this. It's really, all that is about sharing and disclosure. How do you get that? You know, you can invite it. Of course, many heads do. But how do you know your invitation is not an imposition? And how do you recognize when people aren't safe to meet that invitation? It's tough work, but it isn't just going to come through a marketing campaign. It comes through psychological safety and recognizing that we move at the speed of trust. And when we recognize people who look like us, feel like us, are talking about things that we need them to talk about, that trust can move very fast. Otherwise it can take years and years, because people with a lot of agency don't risk much when they send out invitations that they themselves may not be on the receiving end of. So it's about sharing and disclosure, and it's about assistive technology at times, but it's really, and I've said it twice there, leadership and culture. On my last slide, and it really coming to the end, is look, and I think there's some really good talkers have been talking about this today and continue, and Atif will, and this is really important stuff to come across, you know, that what we've seen here today and what we're gathering and what's been spoken already, is we need to reframe this narrative. Recognizing that people aren't just harder to reach, but they have been historically easier to ignore. And that's tough stuff. To accept that we're all neurodiverse, and I think that's really important. Our joys, our liberations, our traumas, our sadness, our access changes the window to the world we have. It's not just about whether we get a diagnosis or not to help us understand the world we live in or to help people understand us. So it's recognizing that we're all neurodiverse. We're just not all marginalized because of it. And that's the critical. So what do we do there? And you start by expecting diversity, and we should. We shouldn't be reacting to it. We expect it. We're better off when we anticipate it and welcome it. And the last point is, look, the disability employment gap, and it was touched on by Lisa Cameron earlier today, it's not going to change. So 36%, we won't change the equity of that in this lifetime. There's not a single person in this room will be alive when that has equity. It's tragic, but it's true. So then to understand, look, it's not going to change just through the pace we're going now, not even through recruitment changes. It's going to change, and it's going to change hard through disclosure. And that's about psychological safety. And to finish on that point is, look, that's a good thing. You know, the diversity of thought, you know, it changes the world. And it probably is the only thing that really ever does. So thanks for listening.